All right, people. Welcome back to the channel. Are you looking for an affordable audio interface from a known, reputable manufacturer that has 70 decibels of clean gain for your favorite low output dynamic mics? Well, okay, here's the top of the unit. Just to the left of this, as I'm recording this now, is my Lewitt 240, and you can see that I'm getting good levels here. So let's have a look at the controls. So starting with the three buttons on the bottom. The first one here is the mute button. And now I'm unmuted again. The next thing is an audio effects button. So when you turn this on, it lights up green, and this is just to enable compression and basically 3-band EQ. You've just got low, mids, and highs. And I will deal with the settings for this later because you need to adjust that in the Vocaster software app rather than on the buttons of the device itself. But let's go ahead and turn that off. And finally, this little button that has looks like a graph from an Excel spreadsheet. This little button is just to use their auto gain feature. Now, this sets the level for both studio speakers, which are on 1/4-inch TRS outputs on the back, and as you can see, the icon for the headphone level. Unfortunately, you cannot separate the levels for headphones and the 1/4-inch line level outputs, as you can on some other devices like the Focusrite 2i2s or the SSL2 from Solid State Logic, or my other interface, which is a Sound Devices MixPre. And what Focusrite is trying to do here is just make this a simple interface. The microphone level adjustment, which controls the preamp gain for the XLR input, is actually on a rotary encoder, and I'm not going to spin this, but that is infinitely adjustable. And up here on the top, you can see the 48-volt phantom power is enabled. Of course, I need that for the Lewitt 240. And the little computer icon that is also illuminated just tells us that the unit is actually connected via USB-C and we're getting signal. So let's have a look at the connections on the back here. The first thing that I really like about this unit is that it actually has a power button. My SSL2 didn't have that. The Focusrite 2i2s that I've owned don't have that, and I find that to be a very useful feature. Another thing I like about this interface is the 3.5 millimeter output, and you can see it's got a little camera icon above it. So you can plug a desk mic into your interface and then run a 3.5 mil cable directly to your camera if that's the setup you're using. The other nice feature of having this camera record output is that if you have one of these, if you have one of the 2 transmitter, 1 receiver setups from Rode or other manufacturers that are capable of recording internally, you can just connect your recording transmitter to that little 3.5 millimeter output, and then basically this device becomes a recorder as well as an interface. And then up on the top you can see we've got 48-volt phantom power, which we don't need for dynamic mics, but of course a mic like this Lewitt 240 we do. And then there's also an auxiliary 3.5 millimeter input, and that's for a phone. So if you're doing things on your phone, you're connected on some kind of remote option, you actually then get two inputs on this device. Although it doesn't have two XLRs like the big brother, which is the Focusrite Model 2 version of this. And then it's just got a Kensington lock slot. So what you've been listening to is the Lewitt LCT 240. It's a very popular microphone. Let me take a break. I'll hit the mute button and let me grab a Rode Pod mic and listen to how that sounds. Okay, so now I'm on the Rode Pod mic. The big feature, the big selling point of this Vocaster 1 being designed at the podcast or live streaming market is that Focusrite realized that microphones like the Shure SM7B and the little brother to that, the more affordable option, and the Rode Pod mic and the Electro Voice RE20 and all of these dynamic studio radio kind of microphones need a ton of gain. And this one has 70 decibels of clean gain. And compared to the 2i2 models from Focusrite, that's about 15 dB more than their 55 decibels of gain. But I think those interfaces are more geared toward musicians. And if you're singing into a microphone rather than talking into it, you don't need as much gain on your preamp. So this unit actually excels and was designed for that market. Okay, so I've got the Vocaster HUD running and it's somewhat confusing. Host is the XLR input. Auxiliary is that 3.5 mil input. Loopback 1 is sound from your computer. And loopback 2, I think, is another loopback from your computer, or it could be the loopback from the 3.5 millimeter phone input. And then you have a show mix, which is basically your master output. So if you're using more than one input, including something from a phone, something from the auxiliary, you can then turn down the level on the show mix, or you can adjust these individually to reduce levels if you've got too hot a level. The unit does not feature an auto limiter, and these buttons in the software just represent what you see on the front of the unit. Of course, you can enable 48 volt. Now I'm on the pod mic, so I'm not using that. And if you enable these enhance features, okay, so it's only on or off. Okay, now it's on, now it's off. And you've got these options: radio, clean, warm, and bright. And you can adjust these somewhat. Okay, so first, rumble reduction. I think this is basically a high-pass filter. I don't need that, so I have none. Now, on my clean preset, if I go back to factory default, that's what it looks like. And you can see it has quite a bit of compression on it, but I don't really need that. So I adjust my clean preset to have just a little bit of compression. And because the Rode Pod mic isn't great in low end, I like to bring up low end a little bit. So what I'm doing here is only about 3 decibels. You can see that our adjustment range isn't great. We've got 6 decibels increase or 6 dB cut. I kind of like to scoop the mids just a little bit. And okay, putting a little bit of high end is not a big deal. So that's how I set that. I also don't use the headphone out very much because on my setup, this thing lives at the end of a long desk. So I control everything for my live streaming and Zoom calls and all that other stuff with this Vocaster Hub app. You can also mute the 1/4-inch output for studio monitors or going to a hi-fi amp or a headphone amp or whatever you want. Because I don't generally need these, I like to keep them muted. So hopefully it will take that electronic circuit out of the box, out of this show mix. Anything I can do to minimize noise on an electronic device is something I always try to do. So again, host is the XLR input. If you have the Vocaster 2 model, you will see host and guest, as well as the auxiliary 3.5 mil, the loopback 1 for a computer, loopback 2 also for something coming back from the computer, and show mix there. And again, the auto gain function, the enhance, the mute, these are all physical buttons on the top of the unit. So my final thoughts on this: to be able to get something at this price point that has 70 decibels of clean gain, so I can plug an SM7 or a pod mic or another dynamic mic into it without having to use a cloud lifter or some other kind of gain booster, which is always going to introduce noise into your signal path, is fantastic. And it also sounds great with a little bit less amplification on a condenser mic like my Lewitt or my Sennheiser MKH60 is good for my workflow. So if you have any comments, questions about this interface, or you've had any issues with one of your own, please leave comments below. Thanks for watching. That's a wrap, and we'll see you on the next one.